Did you put that on at the time he put his initials?
Yes, I did.
What did he tell you next?
I told him I felt he was lying. I told him I just wanted him to tell me the truth. At this point, he got into another version.
Now, approximately what time was it that he had finished giving this information to you?
It was about 25 minutes after midnight. We're into the 26th in the early morning hours. I made a request to Detective Martino and Mr. Knight to go to the homicide office interview room.
What time did you go into the interview room?
This was approximately 12:40 a.m. on the 26th. I once again told Mr. Knight that I felt he was lying. His story was not consistent, and similar to the second story, he started to tell us another version. I told him that the statement he made was inconsistent with our investigation. I told him again I felt he was lying, and I wanted him to tell me the truth. At this point, he got into another version, and they wanted to party with somebody, and it was pre-planned.
Do you recall what time this was when he finished this version?
This was about 2:30 a.m.
What happened after he told you that?
Once again, I told him that the story was too inconsistent with the investigation. We had medical evidence. At this point, he got into another version. He started it with himself and Rosen. She had gotten into the van voluntarily, and he made a move on her. He grabbed her, hurt her, forced her into the back of the van, and raped her. Now they're in the cemetery, and James Rosen had strangled her with a length of cord. They left the cemetery, and he went again to the dead end where the railroad tracks are. They took her out, and they rolled her out. It was at this point he said he got scared, and he told them he was leaving. At this point, I challenged him. He told them, "Who were you telling?" I said, "I caught you again in a lie." Now finally he told me he was with James Rosen and Dennis Holt. We're drinking, he said. When they got to Merrick Road, they saw a girl. The girl gets into the van. Dennis said to the girl, "Do you want to do the right thing?" Mr. Knight told me that the right thing on the streets means get laid. At that point, the girl got furious. She said, "Stop the van, let me out." Knight told me Holden jumped out of the seat and grabbed her. She was fighting, at which point the girl slaps him and hits him right in the face. He said he freaked out and he hits her twice. He said he jumped on top of her. Holden was raping her. They got to the cemetery. She's almost unconscious at this time. At this point, Rosen was raping the girl. He said he got out of the van and laid a blanket out in the cemetery. Subsequently, Rosen and Holden laid her down in the blanket. He noticed that she had jewelry on. He said he ripped that off of her neck. Holden was taking the remainder of her jewelry and rings off. She starts to come to now. She says, I gotta tell. Knight said he got on top of her and put his knees on her shoulders. He covered her mouth, and Holden stood over the girl and told her, "You have to die." They threw Knight a length of rope. He wrapped it around her neck twice and twisted it like a corkscrew. He said he threw the rope and the girl's body into the van. They drove to the dead-end street across from the cemetery. Rosen and Holden carried the girl's body into this heavy brush area. Then they rolled the body out of the blanket and they kicked leaves on the body. He suggested to them we should cover her with these wooden pallets, which they did. When Knight was leaving, he said he threw some jewelry down by the railroad tracks.
About what time was it that he finished telling you about the events?
It was about 6 a.m. in the morning. At this point, I told Mr. Knight that I felt this was accurate, so I wanted to take a written statement from him, and I reduced it to a 7-page statement.
May I have this marked for identification, exhibit number 3? And approximately what time of the morning were you finished with that statement?
About 10 to 9 in the morning.
What happened after you finished writing the 7 pages?
When it was completed, I gave it to Mr. Knight, and he reviewed it. After he read everything, I asked him to sign each of the pages, and he signed his name, address, and the town he lives in on the last page.
And what happened next?
Made a breakfast order for Mr. Knight, Detective Garber, and myself. We got that about 9:30 a.m. During that time, I had told Mr. Knight that I would like for him to go with some detectives to the location of the cemetery where the girl's body was found. 10:45 a.m. They went to the location and the area of the cemetery, the railroad tracks. They were returned about 12:20 in the afternoon. A short time later, I told Mr. Knight that we'd like to do a videotape with the district attorney present. About 12:35, myself and Gerber took Knight to the district attorney's office.
Did the defendant say anything while you were bringing him into the district attorney's office?
No,
At that time, while that interview was conducted, was the camera turned off during the interview?
no, it wasn't.
And what, if anything, did he ask you about speaking to anybody or any attorney?
He never asked for an attorney.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Did you receive various reports from the Scientific Investigation Bureau and other bureaus of the police department with regard to anything concerning the case before you interviewed Mr. Knight?
During the course of the investigation, yes.
When you interviewed Mr. Knight on March 25, 2007, what was the first thing you recall saying to him?
I told him that I'd spoken to Detective Gerber, and he felt that he wasn't telling the truth, and that he was involved in the murder.
The only thing Gerber told you, John Knight said, about the murder was maybe Dennis Holden had something to do with it. He gets crazy when he drinks.
That's correct.
At the conclusion of your first discussion with him, do you know what time that discussion started and what time it ended?
About 10:50 p.m. and was concluded about 11:15.
Do you have anything that might refresh your recollection as to the exact time that it began and ended?
My notes.
And was there any kind of a break, like from 11:15 until the second questioning? Or did that begin almost at 11:15?
11:20 p.m. it began. In that 5 minutes, Mr. Knight and I smoked.
Did you immediately discount that first statement of John Knight based on the fact that there was only one person left with Teresa Foreman, according to his story?
Yes, correct.
During the time between 10 and 11:30 on March 25th, did you ever mention Dennis Holden's name or James Rosen's name to John Knight?
No, I didn't. He mentioned it to me around 1:30 in the morning.
Did you write John Knight's statements down and then when he finished, take your paper, rip it up and say, "That's not the truth, I don't believe you"?
No, I just wrote a start and a finish time on military time on a little scratch paper. No notes whatsoever.
Then you asked questions finally, and the sixth statement that took from 3:30 until about 6 to complete?
A little bit before 6.
So around 5:50 a.m. on March 26th, when Mr. Knight completed that statement, you were satisfied that the story fits in with all my scientific investigation. I'll accept that story?
It had the majority of them, yes. He was accurate with the description of the clothing, other than in his mind, other than the blouse. He wasn't sure.
Well, in fact, there was no description of the blouse that you had either, was there?
No.
So you began to write the statement about 6:30 in the morning?
Yes. We went over each sentence that I wrote. The statement that I wrote was not materially different from his oral statement. We finished about 9:30 a.m.
When did you begin to write notes with regard to the various statements you had taken?
About 4:30 p.m. There were 5 pages of notes. 6 was depicted as oral in those notes.
I have no further questions.
Members of the jury, we are now on the defendant's case if he desires to call any witnesses.
I call Lisa Price. Do you know John Knight?
Yes, he's my fiance, and we were engaged in June of 2005.
Do you have a recollection of March 21st, 2007, around 5 p.m. that evening?
Yes, 2 detectives came to my house and asked John to come in for some questioning, so he went in.
Do you have a recollection of March 25th, 2007?
Yes, John came home from work and I brought him a 6-pack of beer. Then 2 detectives came and asked John to come down for more questioning.
Did anyone speak to you at police headquarters?
Yes, I called 3 times at 8 or 8:30 p.m., then again at 9 p.m., and they said they were in the middle of questioning John. I called again at 11:30 p.m. and they said they were just finishing up and they would bring John home within an hour. I woke up at 6 a.m. the next day, but John was at home, so I called the homicide squad, but no information. So I went down there with my father and 3 detectives came down and told me that John confessed to it.